And today we're going to speak about electricity on Shabbat. And I'm going to adhere to the article that I wrote. I'm going to read through it and comment on it if necessary. And if you have questions, comments, you could raise hand and I'll answer. If not immediately at the end of the discussion, but we'll do it in order. So here's the article that I wrote, Electricity on Shabbat, and I read this. One of the most pressing problems for the Orthodox Jewish world is that of using electricity on Shabbat and Yom Tov. I have written in the past about Yom Tov, and many readers wanted to know what is the difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov, and what is the opinion of Halacha regarding electricity on Shabbat. And I must say, just so in parenthesis, that the term Halacha in itself is debatable. Who determines the Halacha? And so we have to explain that there is no central institution or establishment of Halacha, especially when it comes to the questions of rituals and the laws between us and God. When we talk about criminal law or financial law, the system is more structured. It seems that there's a way to qualify people, to teach them on what the halacha is, and how they become dayanim, etc. When it's ritual law and mitzvot sheben adam lamakom, between us and God, it is more fluid. Sometimes you rely on the community, you rely on practice. Sometimes you have people who really have no rabbinical or halachic background, or no deep halachic background, who decide on to do certain things, and more commonly, it's to make something forbidden than to make it allowed. So we use the word halacha with a grain of salt, restricted manner. Here said that, well, it is hard to say what is the opinion of so many voices in our over communicated world. But it seems that most people believe that the use of electricity is categorically forbidden. So my point here is we're not talking about the official or the methodical analysis of halacha, examining that practice directly against the laws of Shabbat, but rather we're talking about how people feel about it. So here's a rephrasing of the question: are there any opinions which do not consider electricity forbidden, or they consider it to be less severe than a biblical prohibition? So I'm starting with Rabbi Auerbach. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is considered one of the greatest of the last century. And Reb Mordechai Halperin was very close to him. Himself, Reb Halperin is a scientist, a medical doctor, also has degrees in physics, mathematics, and law. So also a veteran of the Israeli army and the head of Schlesinger Institution for Medical Ethics. So he would usually consult with Rabbi Auerbach. The title of the article in which this discussion appears is have it here: the approach of Rabbi Auerbach to laws of medicine and protection of life. So he discusses in general the approach of Rabbi Auerbach, which people consider to be lenient towards saving life and medicine in general. And I have to qualify here also something that we've mentioned before. When we say lenient or strict, lenient and stringent, those are terms that people use very loosely when they decide. It seems like when they decide that someone is saying something they disagree with, he would be lenient, right? But after careful study of the divide between what people call stringent and lenient, I came to the conclusion that it has to do with the relationship or the category, let's say the category of this prohibition or halacha. When it comes, the person who takes God's side in the matter is called strict, and the person who takes people's side in the matter is called lenient. So, for example, if I take Shabbat and electricity, if I say you can use electricity, I'm allowing people to do that, then I'm taking their side, I'll be lenient. If I say you can't use it, so I'm protecting God and the Shabbat, then I'm considered strict. But those categories could be flipped if we think about the consequences of using and not using electricity, which we'll see in a second. So going back to the article, I said the second category in Rabbi Halpern's discussion is called Siag, wisdom's guard. That is based on a statement in Pirkei Avot where the rabbis say Siag LaChochma Shetika. Just like now, you heard the AC unit on the house next door, not mine, became quiet, and all of a sudden we feel wiser and more intelligent because we can think quietly. The original meaning of that statement was, if you don't know what to say, don't say it, and then people will think that you're wise. That's Siag LaChochma. That is offense against being discovered as not a wise person. Also, as a wise person, sometimes it's better not to speak because you know that what you're going to say is not going to be heard. But Rabbi Halpern breaks it into chapters, and the first one in this category is called Keshem she'asur le'atir et ha'asur, kach asur le'esor et ha'mutar. Just as one cannot allow that which is forbidden, one cannot forbid that which is allowed. It's the same level of prohibition. You can't say of something that is forbidden that it is okay to use or to do, but you also cannot say the opposite of something that is allowed to say that it is forbidden. So Rabbi Halpern writes, and that's my translation. He says, it is well known that great scholars disagreed on the halacha of completing an electric circuit on Shabbat. According to the Chazon Ish, doing so is a transgression of the biblical prohibition on construction on Shabbat, which we've discussed in the past. It's very hard to argue that completing an electric circuit is considered construction. So Rabbi Halpern writes in the name of Rabbi Auerbach, yes, he says that according to the Chazon Ish, it is considered construction on Shabbat. Rabbi Auerbach says, thinks that there is a biblical prohibition only on turning on an incandescent light bulb, since that is similar to starting a fire. In other devices, which do not include a light bulb or a heating coil, there is no problem of construction, and there is no difference between turning up a water tap and activating an electric circuit. It means that not only in all devices, including a light bulb, there is never a problem of construction. And I think it's very simple, very logical to all of us to make the distinction between construction and completing an electric circuit, right? None of us, when we flip the switch, would think of it as construction. And construction usually applies, not usually, always applies to something which is permanent and physical. The act of bringing together two metallic pieces that thus close the circuit is not construction. What happened here? Why did the Chazon Ish, Avraham Mishaya Karlitz, why did he come up with that? Obviously, because there was an attempt here to define the use of electricity as forbidden. So first you say it is forbidden, and then you try to find the category under which it will be forbidden. So Rabbi Auerbach rejects it, and he says only the incandescent light bulb would be forbidden because it is like starting a fire. So Rabbi Halpern writes that 30 years ago. So that happened in 1967. The article was written in 1997. In my youth, I came to Rabbi Auerbach with a halachic question. Rabbi Auerbach led the conversation to the theme of electric devices on Shabbat, and asked me, how should I respond to people who ask about using certain electric devices on Shabbat? He said that in his opinion, there is no prohibition against against it, but the broader audience, which does not fully understand the combination of technological concept and halachic minusha, might not understand the difference between permissible and forbidden devices, and that would lead to errors. So Rabbi Halperin says that already in 1967, Rabbi Auerbach drew the line between electric light bulb and heating coil and other devices, and he said, I don't know what to tell people who ask me whether it's allowed or not allowed, because there is no prohibition. So if he follows the rule that we mentioned before, you cannot forbid that which is allowed, how can he say that it is forbidden? So, and Rabbi Halperin asked Rabbi Auerbach, he said, I asked the rabbi whether it wouldn't be better to forbid the use of all devices. And the rabbi answered that such a solution will be against the halacha. Hear that. To forbid the use of all devices, of all electric devices, according to Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, will be against the halacha. Because just as one cannot allow that which is forbidden, one cannot forbid that which is allowed. In our generation, said Rabbi Auerbach, we do not have the authority to legislate new regulations. So let's take a moment to digest this. Okay, what Rabbi Auerbach said. So it is quite shocking that Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says very clearly, I cannot say that using electric devices on Shabbat is forbidden. So Rabbi Halperin explained what was the solution. He says this, shetika יכולה להיות פתרון לבעיה אותה הציג הרב זצ"ל. He says, so what is the solution for that? You can't say that it is forbidden because it is allowed. So how can I say that electric devices are forbidden? I can say that it is allowed because then people would not know the difference between what is allowed, what is forbidden, and they might violate a transgression. So, but if you keep quiet and you don't express your opinion, it's a solution. Why? אין בהטלת איסור שלא כדין על דברים מותרים. You don't forbid unnecessarily things which are allowed. ואין בה סכנת בלבול, and there's also no confusion בין מכשירים מותרים למכשירים אסורים. Then you don't create a confusion between that which is allowed and that which is forbidden. Why? שהרי ללא הוראת היתר מפורשת, without clearly saying that this is allowed, מנהג ישראל להחמיר בכל הנוגע למכשירים חשמליים בשבת. It has become the custom to be strict. Remember that definition of strict. What does it mean? In anything that has to do with electric devices on Shabbat. So people, the default option, right, the neutral, if you don't say mutar or asur, they will think it's asur. ושתיקה שאיננה מספקת את הוראת ההיתר, and by keeping quiet and not providing the permission to use electric devices, אינה יוצרת סכנת בלבול כזה, does not create such a danger of confusion. What is the problem with that statement, even without looking at the consequences? You say that you cannot forbid that which is allowed. But if your silence will be interpreted as a prohibition, then basically you said that it is forbidden. If you didn't say it is okay to do it, then everybody thinks it is not okay. And so you have insinuated, or you send the message to people that it is forbidden. So Rabbi Halperin argues...
Rabbi, we had here an opportunity to do some real impact in a halachic world, and it was wasted.
Well, it seems to me that maybe there was just...
We'll talk about that.
I wanted to say something. Can you hear me? I think this whole thing's been taken.
Was surprised. So look at the text again. So what Rabbi Halperin argues is that inaction is the best solution to the dilemma of the posek. Cannot say it's forbidden, does not want to say that it is allowed, so don't say anything, people will assume that it is forbidden. And then he said that the practice is to be stringent and not use electric devices on Shabbat. So my reaction to that is this: inaction could only go a certain distance. First, Rabbi Auerbach mentioned on several occasions that he holds that there is no prohibition in using electric devices on Shabbat, and that information has been since disseminated. So one way or another it's going to get out. Second, since there are other rabbis who address the issue, and the sides of the debate are well known now, keeping silent is agreeing with those who forbid the use of electricity on Shabbat. This is like not casting your vote. If you don't cast your vote, you're basically giving your vote to the other party, to one of the parties. You are actually doing something. Finally, there has been a steady erosion within the Orthodox community regarding the willingness to observe the prohibition, which in turn created an underground movement of people leading double lives. They are fully observant in the public arena, but in the privacy of their home, they use electric devices. In some communities, this phenomenon has become the norm, and it is called half Shabbat. In Israel, data analysis showed a spike in WhatsApp use on Shabbat afternoon in areas with the religious concentration, and further investigation found that observant Jews were trying to figure out where to meet for Shalishidis, the third meal of Shabbat, by using WhatsApp. So, against the first argument of Rabbi Halperin that to keep mum is the best solution, I would say, first of all, Rabbi Auerbach did mention on several occasions. Second, keeping quiet is agreeing with one opinion, in this case, one which forbids it. Third, it has already been practiced by many people to use secretly electricity on Shabbat. But also this, saying that the practice is to be stringent, that very fact that he says here, Minhag Yisrael le'achmir bechol hanogea lemachshirim hashmaliyim b'Shabbat, this is the practice to be stringent, that it is falling into the trap of defining prohibition as stringency. Remember, that's what I opened with. Why do we say that forbidding the use of electricity on Shabbat is being stringent? The very same quote that Rabbi Auerbach used to justify not declaring a prohibition, right? Keshem she'asur le'atir et hamutar, right? He said that. He said, I cannot declare it a prohibition. Is explained, it's mentioned several times in Halacha, and explained by the Shach, Rabbi Shabtai Cohen, as a cautionary measure against stringencies which turn out to be leniencies. And that's what he writes. It's in Pilpul Be'anagat Orot B'Isur V'Heter. The title of his article here is a discussion of the methodology when issuing rulings on the laws of forbidden and allowed meat, usually on kashrut. He says this: Keshem she'asur le'atir et ha'asur, kach asur le'asor et hamutar. We've seen this before. Just as you're not allowed to allow that which is forbidden, you're not allowed to forbid that which is allowed. Why is that? Mipnei she'al harov yesh bo tzad hakal b'makom acher. Because in most cases, this will lead to a leniency in another place because you have made it forbidden here. V'havei humra de'ate lidei kula. Now you have created a stringency that led to a leniency, right? Or in other words, you added a safety measure which led to a breach of security, and that's not what you want, right? Even though you think that this will never cause a leniency or a breach of security, asur, it is forbidden. That could lead to a chain reaction of 100 steps, and eventually something will happen that will cause leniency. So I want to give an example before we go to questions on how this could be, how could being strict leads to a leniency. Because people chose to be strict on the matter, using electricity is viewed by many as one of the major transgressions on Shabbat. In their opinion, it is one which is biblically forbidden and carries capital punishment, and which should be avoided at all costs. The result is that many Orthodox Jews, when faced with a medical or fire emergency on Shabbat, will not make a phone call, and there were cases that ended with fatalities. This problem is also manifested in the work of observant doctors, which slows down on Shabbat as they have to ask a non-Jew to take notes for them. It would have been better and easier to allow doctors and nurses to use tablets to expedite their work and to assure that they are available when needed for an emergency. This is a simple example of what you think is strict is actually being lenient. Of where you think you're adding a safety measure, you're creating a breach of security. We read here, this is my argument, the posek or the common Jew who is strict regarding the use of electricity is extremely lenient when it comes to caring for the sanctity of human life. This result may not have been foreseen by the first rabbis who declared electricity on Shabbat to be biblically forbidden or chose to remain neutral. But with the growing presence of electricity in our lives, it is time to seriously address the problem and inform the people. So, I want to go to discuss the light bulb, okay? But if we could even stop here before we discuss the light bulb and say this. Rabbi Auerbach rejects the Hazon Ish's interpretation of the prohibition of electricity as stemming from construction on Shabbat. There are two other things that people mention, and I will discuss later in the article, but I want to bring them up here. We've discussed them in the past. One is the prohibition of makeh befatish, which is the last melacha of the 39 melachot. Makeh befatish means the completion of the work. Literally, it means to hit with the hammer. And literally, it meant the work of the goldsmith or the blacksmith, where he removes the object from the anvil and smooths it, and so the last blow that he gives with the hammer makes now this artifact ready for use. How many times can one perform that act of makeh bepatish, of completing an object? How many times exactly? One time only. Once you've completed it, it is complete. You can't complete an object twice. So another classic example that is given in the halachic literature is that of garments that would come sewn together in the sleeves or in the way that you can't wear them, and maybe as a means of protection against theft in stores. So you have to cut it open. So now you separate the sleeves and you could wear them. Now, even if you went and you sewed them back together again and you cut it, you're not makeh bepatish, because this garment is already ready for use. You made it now unusable, but it is already completed in terms of completion. So to say that every time I flip a switch, I'm completing an object that otherwise would not have been usable is really an invalid argument, and it's rejected by many poskim. It's the final argument that could be used against, from the point of view of what we could say codified halacha and not the spirit of Shabbat, which I'll get to also, is that electricity is fire. So I mentioned last week, and Daniel said he wants to do a presentation on that, and we'll get to that in the future. Electricity is not fire. Rabbi David Shlush did the analysis set with an observant physicist, and he writes in his Hemda Genuza, he said, we could say one thing for sure. Electricity is not fire. Nobody knows. Really, we're still trying to understand what electricity is, but it's not fire. Fire is a chemical reaction. Electricity is a physical reaction. It's true that electricity could generate heat and could cause fire, but that is true also with the sun. Would one say that you have an obligation? You have an obligation to, if you have a field outside your house, which is your property, and there are dry thorns there, that you have to cover them before Shabbat, so there wouldn't they wouldn't go up in fire because of the heat, or you have to go maybe through your field and remove all bottle bottoms which could serve as a magnifying glass and start a fire in your field. Of course not. And so we could argue that electricity should not be used if you produce with this electricity a certain you perform a certain work that is forbidden on Shabbat. So for example, cooking or baking is agreed by all that is something that is forbidden on Shabbat. So turning an electric oven in order to bake in it, the prohibition with the baking and not just the turning of the oven that generates heat. But we get there in a second
I think
when we discuss when we discuss the light bulb. I will get to the question of generating heat. Before we go to the issue of fire, I want to address the issue of the spirit of Shabbat, because this is something that is really, really important. So, yes, of course, we run the risk of if we say that electricity could be used on Shabbat, people will use their iPads and smartphones and go on social media, and they wouldn't have the spirit of Shabbat anymore. But if you go into the houses of many observant families, at least in my opinion, you will find that they don't have the spirit of Shabbat either. For me, if a family observes all the laws of regulations of Shabbat, but you don't feel true joy and happiness and connection between the members of that family, that means that they don't keep they don't have the spirit of Shabbat. So yes, it is. We do run the risk of people not doing certain things, but we can't control everything. And I'll give you an example. I think I mentioned it in one of my classes, but to me it's really fascinating how this came about. One of my friends who uses electricity at home, not for cooking. But they use electricity to turn on the light, to sometimes cuddle with their children and watch TV on Friday night. That's what they feel it's about. Okay. So recently they got a Tesla. About a year ago they got a Tesla, and I asked them if they ever use the Tesla on Shabbat, because since you use electricity, how about the Tesla? So the answer was yes, we used it once. We were vacationing and we needed to get from one place to another. The summer it was hot. So I asked what are the reviews? How do you feel about that? So the wife said, I'm never going to do it again. She felt very uncomfortable with that. It's not for her. And the husband says, it was okay, but I don't think I need it usually. Which means that they had to deal with a certain possibility that using electricity on Shabbat presented them with, but they decided to withdraw. They tried it, they didn't like it, and they decided this is what I do. So this is where we give credit to the people. People will know what to do. When we talk about social media, people suffer from it the whole week. If they can't, get away from it on Shabbat, it's a problem. But maybe after a while, and I think that's what happens to most people, if you tell them it's okay, and after a while they say, wait, you know what, I liked it better where on Shabbat I would sit around the table and talk to my family or play board games, right? But that is a risk. What are we doing? We're doing the calculation, we're doing the accounting. We say we want to prevent, I don't know how many, 30% of the people from using their smartphones on Shabbat, and therefore we'll say that it is forbidden, running the risk of someone losing his or her life. Who gave us the right to do that? We have to tell people the truth of what is the scope of the prohibition, including the spirit of Shabbat. Including, we could tell them, listen guys, there's a risk that the quality of your Shabbat, the family life, the togetherness will be hurt, so consider it carefully. Okay, they will listen. So okay, I think I will stop here and give room for questions, and next week we'll continue with the discussion. Yeah, I'm just stopping the recording. We'll have room for questions, and then next week we'll continue with the discussion of the light bulb. And if you don't have the article, let me know. I'll email it to you so you could study it before we come here and then discuss it together.